Poor old Ida Wilkins. 1. August. Poor old Ida Wilkins has been alone ever since her husband passed away 24 years ago. The dear thing never had any visitors, and her landline only rung when a telemarketer gave a call. Ida Wilkins was alone in the world. Sure, she would engage with employees at the local market, but that was the extent of her human interaction for many, many years. You may suppose this would make her cold, but no, poor old Ida never lost her sweet charm. She may hardly remember the faces of the people she speaks to every day on her errands, but they remember her. But their relationship with her ends at the door of the establishment. Nobody truly loved Ida Wilkins. Ida's home is a simple home, and it hasn't changed in the past 24 years. When she arrives home from her daily errands, she leaves her key in a tray beside the door. The door opens directly into her living room, furnished with a couch and 2 chairs facing a small television, though Ida only ever sits in the navy blue recliner. Adjacent to the living room is a dining room, no longer used. The table and chairs are still there, but have been untouched for years. There's probably a layer of dust covering it, but with Ida's failing eyesight she'll never notice. Through the dining room is her kitchen, where a small table and a single chair resided, where Ida has eaten her meals for the past 2 and change decades. In the very back of the house is her bedroom, once shared with her husband. Since his death, she has never bothered to pack away his things. He still has his own dresser and half of the closet, but his side of the bed remains untouched. Poor old Ida Wilkins. Every morning, the little woman gets out of bed before the sun has finished rising. Walking at a speed rivaling the fabled tortoise, head gently shaking against the strain of being held up, Ida dresses herself and has a bowl of cereal. She does not shower very often. For being alone and arthritic, the exertion of bathing is just not worth it. After breakfast, she goes to the mall. She couldn't tell you a single store in the shopping center, apart from the Macy's where she enters, and the JCPenney with the good bathrooms. She just goes there to walk. An hour passes before she reaches the far end of the mall, where she grabs a seat at the food court to rest. Another hour, and she's shuffling through the door at Macy's on her way back home. Whenever she needs groceries or whatever, she makes that stop at this point. And by the time she gets home, it's barely noon. Ida spends the rest of her day, every day, in that navy blue recliner, watching Wheel of Fortune and other game show reruns she has seen a dozen times but doesn't remember, before retiring to her bedroom no later than 7. Yes, for 24 years, Ida has lived this quiet, simple life. You would think that any deviation from what she has grown accustomed to would garner suspicions. But no, poor old Ida Wilkins never suspected a thing. The first time Ida should have suspected something was in late August. She had just gotten home from her daily trip to the mall and plopped herself in her usual seat. Reaching for the remote, it surprised her that it was not in its usual place. Rather than resting atop the armrest on her recliner, the remote had relocated to the couch. She snatched it up and started the television. The sound of a football game sent her mind back 24 years to the last time she had heard this sound. Not much had changed in sports media since she had last seen it, much like her game show reruns. She remembered the announcer, could distinctly hear his voice in her mind, although she had no clue who he was. She remembered hearing it while she was in the kitchen, preparing dinner for her and Hank. He used to love those sports, with the teams and such. He was so happy when they won. She made a pork roast, with mashed potatoes and green beans. Ida set the dining room table and made their plates. Then as she sat, Ida called to her husband, "Hank, come eat." Hank did not respond. He would get so focused when the game was on. She called again. "You can keep it on, but you gotta come eat before it gets cold." Hank still did not reply. Feeling irritated at her husband's behavior, and not suspecting anything out of the ordinary, she called out to him one last time. "Well, fine. I'm gonna get started. You can reheat it if it gets cold." So she ate. It was adequate, no better or worse than any other dinner she made. When she had finished and his plate had gotten cold, she finally went to confront him, and found, to no one's surprise but her own, that her husband was dead. Hank had passed during the first quarter of the game, and even though it was then in overtime, she never realized anything was off. In the same way, Ida now switched her television back to her game shows, failing to realize the significance of the channel having changed in the first place. 2. September. Weeks passed, and Ida's routine was unchanged. This incident in August was all but forgotten, a memory as faded as her husband Hank. One day, however, there was a hiccup in her ritual. As the bus pulled up to the mall, she saw the entire entrance was blocked by protesters. What they were protesting, she did not give a damn. She was old and perpetually tired and couldn't be bothered to push her way through the ruckus. So she stayed on board and took the bus right back home. Perhaps her presence could have done something. Or maybe if she cared more, she could have helped out their cause. But no, she'd rather sit at home with her game shows. When she arrived home, hours before her usual return, she caught an aroma in the air. Her nostrils filled with the warm, soothing aroma of her sweet potato casserole. Ida stood there, just inside her front door, resting her hand against the wall as the fragrance transported her to an evening with Hank nearly 30 years ago. It was a special occasion, and Hank always requested sweet potatoes on special occasions. Now Ida makes them whenever. They lost their meaning when she lost Hank. As the dream lifted, and Ida found herself back in the present, it finally occurred to her that she shouldn't be smelling this scent. She had made the sweet potatoes nearly a week ago, and the leftovers were still in the fridge. Despite only cooking for one, she never adjusted her recipe, and made much more than she needed. Then it clicked. Some potatoes must have just spilled on the bottom of the oven, which, when reheated, would once again cause the fragrance to permeate the air. She swiftly, well, as swiftly as that poor old thing could, hobbled into the kitchen and turned the oven off. It never occurred to Ida that she hadn't left the oven on. She simply turned it off and wandered back to her bedroom for a nap. Nor did she bother to check whether or not the oven was empty. But it would be by the time she prepared dinner that evening. As the oven cooled and Ida closed her eyes, she let out the quietest wail. "Oh, Hank." 3. October. Dear old Ida Wilkins was never one for Halloween. If a child knocked at her home, by the time she got out of her chair and walked to the door and opened it, the kid would be 3 houses down. She preferred to just leave a bowl of candy on her doorstep. That's how Hank did it, and it made the night a little easier. She went to bed by 7, long before the trick-or-treaters had gone home. Since she had no direct interaction with them, there was no reason to wait up. Let the kids keep coming till the bowl runs out. Hopefully they wouldn't take the bowl. At least, not again. While she slept, Ida dreamt of trick-or-treating in her childhood. She was dressed as a snow fairy, with a stick in one hand for a wand and a pillowcase in the other to collect candy. In her dream, young Ida was trick-or-treating outside old Ida's own home. The bowl was empty. She approached the door, tapped 3 times with her stick, and waited. Shortly, the lock turned. But when the door opened, she was greeted by a stranger, a man she had never seen before, face shrouded in darkness. He almost resembled her husband Hank when he was younger. The surprise of this encounter jolted her awake, and she realized she had to pee. The older Ida has gotten, the more frequently she has to go, and she can't hold it like she used to. She got out of bed and headed into the hallway toward the bathroom. It was quite dark, and Ida can only see the vaguest shapes. But she was able to find her way in no time. Well, in some time. In the darkness, time seemed to move slower, and at Ida's pace, even a quick trip to the bathroom could take a while. When she finally re-emerged, something caught her attention. She was not sure what she saw, if she even saw anything, but there seemed to be a large, vague shape taking up space in the dark hallway opposite her bedroom. Ida stared toward the shape for some minutes, till she concluded that the dream she had awoken from must have been making her see things. She turned away from the shadow and returned to bed. After Ida was tucked back into bed and long asleep, the shadow she had seen finally began to move. It went to the kitchen, where in the morning Ida would find her candy bowl, already brought in, waiting for her on her little table. 4. November. Thanksgiving was always a difficult time for poor old Ida Wilkins. This season is a time to be with family, and Ida had none. At the mall, she would sit and watch the families pass by, imagining all the wonderful things they would enjoy for Thanksgiving dinner, all the family and friends they would invite. Sometimes she would even imagine herself at their table, and for a brief moment, feeling she wasn't so lonely. Then she would lose sight of them, and the illusion was broken. No, Ida Wilkins would spend Thanksgiving just as she spent every day, alone. Ida began cooking Thanksgiving dinner at the reasonable hour of 8 o'clock in the morning. Even though she was cooking for one, she bought an entire turkey. While that cooked in the oven, she prepared corn and mac and cheese on the stovetop. When the turkey came out, she finished her Thanksgiving prep by browning a few biscuits. She would have leftovers for weeks. Ida fixed herself up a plate and sat in front of her television. Thanksgiving was the one occasion when she wouldn't watch her game shows. First, there was the parade, then the Bozo, Gar, and Ray special on WGN. This special showed all the TV shows from her childhood and allowed her mind to travel back to simpler, less lonesome times with her favorite television characters. Ida doesn't remember much nowadays, but these programs hold a very special place in her heart. She could have seen that the television special had been set to record as well, but that technology was beyond her. Anything more than changing the channel or adjusting the volume was lost on silly old Ida Wilkins. When the show was over and Ida had finished her feast, she returned with her empty plate to the kitchen. But before she put her dishes away, Ida grabbed a clean plate from the cupboard and loaded it with turkey, corn, mac, and a biscuit. She left this plate, along with a napkin and silverware, at the head of the dining room table, then proceeded to clean up and go to bed. The next morning, the plate was empty. 5. December. From that day forward, Ida always cooked enough for two. She'd leave the second plate in the dining room and clean up an empty plate in the morning. Ida never thought to question this new behavior or to ponder who or what was eating from her plates. She was just glad to have someone to cook for again. As Christmas approached, Ida looked forward to a holiday for the first time in 24 years. She would cook an entire holiday feast, like she used to prepare for Hank all those many years ago. All of her decorations were long gone, but she picked up a few new items to give her home a festive vibe. Ida even wrapped a present, a pipe like Hank used to smoke. She hoped he would like it. On Christmas Eve, Ida was buzzing with excitement. She knew this would be a special day. She even wore some drugstore mascara and a spritz of her old perfume that she hadn't touched in a decade. Poor old Ida did whatever she could to make herself feel young and beautiful again. She only had a light dinner that night, saving her stomach and her energy for the feast to come the next day. As the Jeopardy tune filled her home, Ida hardly noticed the game show on the screen. Her mind was racing. For the first time in decades, she had something to look forward to. After dinner, she went to bed, but she didn't fall asleep. Like a child, she stayed awake, eager in anticipation of her nighttime visitor. Unlike Santa Claus, her spirit was really there. She just hoped she could keep awake long enough to hear him. Just as she was starting to doze off, she heard a sound in the kitchen. Silverware, then mastication. He was here. Ida listened to the sounds of chewing for several minutes, until the sounds were replaced by silence. Suddenly, a shadow loomed over the bed from the doorway. Ida cleared her throat as an indication that she was awake, and an invitation for him to come in. She didn't move. She didn't look. She just laid there, in anticipation. The dark figure moved from the doorway to the bed. He lifted the covers, climbed into bed behind her, and wrapped his arms around her. As he fell asleep, he could just hear a faint whisper. Hank. 6. Christmas. Christmas morning, Ida woke up, and for the first time looked at her intruder. The moment she laid her eyes on me, I knew she felt the same way I did. All these months I've lived with her, admiring her from shadows and closets, my love growing ever deeper. It broke my heart seeing how lonely she was. She needed my company as much as I needed hers. Ida looked at me and smiled, comforted in knowing she was no longer alone. She has a companion. With a new spring in her step, she snuck out of bed and got quick to work preparing our breakfast. Oh, it was delicious. Eating beside the woman I love, sharing her table, filled me with unparalleled pleasure. Ida's gone back to our bed, waiting for me to finish my eggs before we consummate our new relationship. I will make love to her, as well as, no, better than her husband ever did. I will fondle her folds, suck on her supple, sagging breasts, suckle her toes if she fancies it, and I will fill her with my glistening love. That sweet, beautiful Ida Wilkins is a sexy vixen, and she has gone without for far too long. It's time for me to correct that. Merry Christmas from our home to yours, and may your days be as bright as ours.